There are still many important unanswered questions after President Trump had a meeting with Zelensky, EU, UK, and NATO leaders. The coalition of the willing, the key unanswered questions. Following President Trump meeting with Zelensky and the coalition of the willing leaders, here are the key unanswered questions, the true unknowns, and the red lines. Key questions. Don't we all want crisp, on-paper answers? Security guarantees. This is the core of the matter. What is the legal instrument for the US role? Executive agreement, treaty, or letter of assurance? And what automaticity is triggered by a new Russian attack? Triggers and timelines. What exactly counts as a breach? Is it missile strike, incursion, cyber attack on grid? Who certifies it, and how fast are responses? Command and control. Who runs day-to-day execution? Is it NATO shape, a EU-UK-led HQ, or ad hoc coalition? What ISR, intelligence, surveillance and reconnaissance and air defense coverage is guaranteed? Ceasefire and enforcement. Is there a ceasefire-first sequence, Europe's preference, or talks while fighting, US leaning? What verification regime, e.g. OSCE UN EU mission, will monitor lines and launches? If a member of the coalition of the willing deploys peacekeepers/trainers after a ceasefire, what are their rules of engagement, SOFAs, status of forces agreements, and air cover? Russia is publicly rejecting NATO country troops. How is that handled? Industrial and/or finance package. The reported $90 to $100 billion rearmament concept. Who pays? What is the US versus EU-UK content? What delivery schedule? And what export control waivers? How are US budgetary authorities and European fiscal space structured to withstand multi-year politics, appropriations and/or backstop mechanisms? Political durability. What durability clauses bind successors in Washington and Europe? Is there a snapback if Russia violates terms? Settlement boundaries and law. How do guarantees explicitly avoid recognizing Russian annexations while keeping Ukraine's constitutional ban and ceding territory intact? What text prevents Budapest-style ambiguity? Russia's stance. There is a need to clarify contradictions. Moscow has signaled no NATO troops will be allowed to enforce ceasefire. Some envoys claim Putin is open to NATO-style guarantees. Which is it, and what written Russian undertakings exist? What is uncertain and market-moving? US role clarity. This will actually help assure. Ukraine's security is not yet a defined, enforceable commitment. The form and force of US participation remain ambiguous. Foreign troop envelope. Europe is exploring post-ceasefire deployments. Russia publicly rejects NATO country troops. That gap is unresolved. Ceasefire sequencing. Europe signals ceasefire first. Trump has been cooler on that sequencing. Process risk for Kyiv. Financing reality. The $90 to $100 billion concept needs sourcing, phasing, and industry throughput. None is settled on paper. Trilateral optics. A mooted Putin-Zelensky, with or without Trump, has no confirmed agenda or venue. Russian buy-in to enforcement remains doubtful. What is untenable, i.e. do not accept in drafting? Vague, non-automatic guarantees. Anything that reads like Budapest Memorandum 2.0, assurances without triggers and/or enforcement teeth. Guarantees without enforcement means paper promises with no ISR, intelligence, surveillance and reconnaissance, air defense, or rapid reaction defined. Peacekeeper presence without ceasefire verification invites incidents and political collapse of the mission. What is unsustainable, i.e. it may start but it won't hold? Europe pays, US coordinates. If it's only buy American at scale without industrial offsets or delivery capacity, this can turn out to be politically brittle in EU capitals and vulnerable to US policy swings. Indefinite European troop presence without exit criteria, domestic mandates and air umbrella could lead to attrition risk and wavering public support. Ceasefire without viable deterrent freezes lines, invites rearmament, and significantly raises the probability of a later, larger war. What is a total reject, i.e., outright redline no's? Recognition, explicit or de facto, of Russian annexations or coerced referendums. And any Russian veto over Ukraine hosting invited foreign forces or over the composition of enforcement missions. Moscow is already trying to rule out NATO country troops. Demilitarization conditions that cap Ukraine's air defense long-range fires while Russia reconstitutes. Sanctions relief without verifiable steps. Withdrawals, prisoner-child returns, verified ceasefire compliance. So, what is acceptable and what is not acceptable really? Security, ceasefire, enforcement, politics. 1. Legal form and automaticity of US role. What is the exact legal instrument for the US role, treaty, executive agreement, joint declaration, and what automatic actions are triggered by a new Russian attack? Acceptable. US has confirmed its readiness to help assure Ukraine's security. The UK and EU seek a written instrument with defined triggers and time-bound response commitments. NATO membership is not under discussion. The ambition here is to have NATO-like certainty without formal accession. Risk. Vague assurances akin to Budapest 2.0 could ensure deterrence fails at first test. 2. Triggers, definitions, and timelines. What counts as a breach, for example, missile and/or drone strike, ground incursion, cyber attack on grid? Who certifies it, and what is the response timeline? How many hours or days? Acceptable. Preparation of agreed clear breach definitions, a named certifier, preferably NATO-linked, and fixed response clocks for air defense, ISR, i.e. intelligence, surveillance and reconnaissance, and resupply. Risk. Ambiguity enables salami slice attacks without triggering help. 3. Command and control. Who runs day-to-day execution? Is it NATO, SHAPE, an EU-UK-led HQ, or an ad hoc coalition? And how is ISR air defense tasking managed? While the favored approach is for a single, named HQ with delegated authorities and pre-agreed ROE for air defense and logistics, any duplication risks delay. Risk. Dispersed command and control would lead to slow, contested responses. 4. Ceasefire sequencing and verification. Is it ceasefire first, as per Europe's preference, or talks under fire? What verification regime, OSCE UN-EU mission, monitors lines and launches? There seems to be support for ceasefire first with an independent verification mission. Talks under heavy fire undermine compliance and public support. Risk. Negotiating under bombardment would lead to a non-credible process. 5. Foreign troops, presence and ROE, rules of engagement. Are European peacekeepers trainers envisaged post-ceasefire? What ROE, SOFAs and air cover apply, given Moscow's stated rejection of NATO country troops? Foreign troops' presence must be invited, EU-flagged, co-led, with robust ROE and air defense umbrella. However, it should be noted that Russia has publicly rejected NATO country troops, and in return it can be expected that, to counter this position, the Allies will not accept a Russian veto over invited forces. Risk. Boots on ground without mandate and/or cover creates incident risk and early withdrawal. 6. Venue, agenda, and choreography of leader talks. What is the agenda and preconditions for a Zelensky-Putin meeting, and is Hungary confirmed as venue? There seems to be support for a substantive, agenda-led leader meeting only with defined outcomes, security text, verification, humanitarian steps. While Hungary is under consideration, substance must drive venue. Risk. Photo op without text may create a narrative win for Moscow and no gains for Kiev. 7. US domestic durability. What durability clauses bind successors, and how will Congress and/or appropriations be handled? Acceptable. De-risking US domestic swings via burden sharing, multi-year European financing, and joint statements that outlive personnel changes. Risk. US reversal risk will plan collapses at midterm. That is the summary of most of the unanswered questions. Join us again for the next report and subscribe to be notified. Bye for now. Watch our report on what security guarantees are required.